So for people who don't already know you, Paige, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and, why you like family history, about your family?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, I'll tell you about my family. So I was born in and live in Utah. I've been married to my husband, Johnny, for 14 years, and we have 8 kids. Um, I should say 7 and 1 on the way. And that's 7 boys and 1 girl. And I love it. I love it. And part of having so many kids is seeing all the women in my family line and how they did, like they survived. So I think it gave me confidence that I could do it. I'm a life coach with Connections Classroom. And I think that's part of the reason I've been so drawn to this Connections experiment, because both are connections and both are connecting to ourselves and through connecting to our family and understanding it better. And I just love it. The part of family history that I am most passionate about is our mental health and understanding how the beliefs and the experiences of the people that we come from passed generation to generation, and how diving in really gives you a window into understanding why you were raised the way you were, or the stories that you got. So that's your little bit about me and my family and my family history passion.
Mm-hmm. I love all of that. When we were first starting this experiment and talking about mental health and family history, you were one of the first names we thought of. I thought, how's this? Like, she talks about this. She talks about the hard things. She talks about the happy things. And so I'm so glad you could come on with us. So times are a little crazy right now with COVID and everything going on. What ways are you finding? I loved what you mentioned about connecting. So what ways are you finding to connect with yourself, to connect with your children, with your husband during these crazy times?
During all of this? Well, I think we should probably define connect, right? Because connecting may just be that I'm sitting next to them on a couch watching Word Party for the 400th time.
Yeah.
So that might be how I'm connecting one day. Connecting to myself through this has been a pretty big process of assessing my feelings, assessing all the feelings, like how am I feeling physically, emotionally, spiritually, spiritually, what else? Just to myself, how am I connecting to that, and then addressing each one of those. And so, physically, if I don't feel at home in my own body, I might, I don't know, do something like actually shower and do my hair one day. Or if I'm not feeling connected spiritually, I might take some time to ponder and just be in a quiet place, which maybe my closet, or it may be outside or somewhere. And connecting to my husband through this has been, so many open and honest and hard conversations about all the fears and all of the unknowns, and how we're going to move forward and prepare without really knowing what we're preparing for. So that's how I've connected, and connecting with my kids. There's been a lot more storytelling because we're all together and we're all home. And my 12-year-old just asked the other day, he's like, Dad always tells us the stories about where he came from and his jobs and what he did, but you never tell us anything. I was like, I tell you so much. I just don't think you're listening. But I didn't say that. I thought that. And then I said, okay, well, what do you want to know? And I'm just realizing, there's been a lot more stories told, especially by my husband, because he's around more. So that's one way of I've been connecting to the kids.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's one of the silver linings. We have more time together. We can and they could hear stories from him. They probably thought you weren't because you're home and telling it all the time.
Right. Well, when I'm like, oh, this is what my mom taught me how to plant, they don't realize to me that's a story, and to them that's just, oh, grandma taught you how to plant, like. But then dad tells them about an hour-long bedtime story that is pretty embellished, or may not be, like some movie that he's retelling as him as the main character, like Indiana Jones, which was the other night. So I'm like, maybe we should start telling him which are fictitious. Otherwise, on Family Search, they're going to be typing in, like, my dad visited the Temple of Doom, So.
That's
But my
awesome.
stories, you're right. I think that's probably why they don't understand the things I tell as stories as much.
What good memories for them too. Like, I love that. The bedtime stories, and maybe it might sound like Harrison Ford. We don't know.
Or Titanic, or whatever movie he's retelling, but intertwined with his hard stories about, growing up. So.
Yeah. Well, I would love to hear more about those stories, about the stories you tell about your family, about the stories your husband tells about his. Like, what are some of those stories, and how do you think they've helped your kids during all of this?
Oh, I love that question. Because when I looked at my upbringing, there were very few stories that were told. It was kind of, they were cherry picked. My parents told the stories they felt safe telling. And when I say they felt safe, it's like they felt like they weren't, it wasn't a situation where they were going to be judged as not being enough, or but that they had a good experience, and so they told those. And when I started having kids, I realized that there was a void that there were stories I didn't want to tell. I was so embarrassed by, or so ashamed of. But the very few that my parents told of their mistakes or their fears were the ones I held on to, or they were the most impactful for me. And so I wanted to make sure that my kids had those kinds of stories. And what has helped me so much is with this life coaching program, with the Connections Classroom program that I went through, it gave me the vocabulary to understand what in my experiences were the truth, and what was a distorted truth, and then what was true to me, like the emotions I felt. And so now when I tell a story, I'll tell any story. I'll tell when, age appropriate. My oldest is 12, so we're sticking with, like, stories that resonate with a 12-year-old or younger. And those stories, I will make sure to tell the story, the way I experienced it. And then I'll ask them, what was my experience in, playing in this lacrosse game and missing 4 of the goals? And they'll say, that was really hard. That was a frustrating game. And I'll say, and what was my distortion behind that? And they'll say that you weren't enough, that you were a bad player. And they'll point out the feelings I felt, and then I bring it to the truth. And I'll say, what was the truth about that? And they'll say that you had a hard game, that maybe you didn't sleep enough, or maybe this, and it doesn't tie to my worth, my individual worth as a soul. And that's what I love, is I tell these stories. And as my husband tells his stories, because my husband had a very turbulent upbringing, and it's a lot of times when we have hardship, we don't want to scare others, or we don't want them to feel bad for us, or we want to control their perception, so we really edit what we tell. And so with these tools, my husband will tell a story, and the kids will see exactly what 12-year-old Johnny felt. Oh, they'll hear what he felt. They'll picture the setting, and then Johnny will reiterate the truth, that the truth is he had a really hard time, and it didn't affect his worth. And he was sad, a lot of it. And he felt a lot of depression. And he had a lot of hard thoughts. And so that's how he and I will tell a story. That's we really pull out what the truth was, the hard facts, what was true about it, which is our own experience with it, and then what were the distorted truths that we believed about ourselves for a long time, and then let them, process it how they want. And each one picks up their own theme of the story or what they want to learn from it.
Mm-hmm. I love that so much. What a valuable life skill for not only our children, but also ourselves to be able to look at the truth and our own version of the truth and to be able to unpack all of that. I think that
Absolutely.
is so incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. And it can be done with any story, right? Like I can go onto Family Search and read these memories of others, of my ancestors, and go, oh, that was their experience. That was their distorted truth. When you hear their own worth that they tied to it, and you can either tie that worth into, look, I was so much better than everyone, or look, I was so much less than everyone. And when you start seeing the themes, you start seeing, oh, this family member was so scared of not being enough that they pretended they were better than everyone, and then it gives you some compassion for them, like, wow, there's pain behind that. I wonder where their pain was. And then you keep looking, and then you keep digging, and you get this whole beautiful story of these distorted truths that have been passed generation to generation, to where you don't have to carry them anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I love that. I love that so much. Now you spoke at Roots Tech back, it seems like forever ago, but it was months
back
ago.
when we were sitting close to each other and not 6 feet apart.
With our hundreds, thousands of friends.
Yes.
Thousands.
And
thousands.
there were no masks. Yeah.
No masks, lots of hand sanitizer, but
yes,
no masks. And I believe you spoke a lot about this same topic with Trace, our family narratives, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, about what else you spoke about at Roots Tech.
It was very, very similar to this. Juliet Eames was so kind to ask me to join her in this, and she really emphasized the importance of our family narratives. And the family narratives are not better than, and they're not less than, because a lot of times we tell a story where we have postured ourselves in one or the other. Like, this is our family had everything and then we lost it, and that's why we're not enough, and that's why we're less than. Or our family had nothing and now look how amazing we are. This is how we became better than others. Where the real powerful story is the one that's in truth. This was the experience. This was what the facts were, and this was my experience within it. So these were my emotions, and these are my feelings, and there was no better than or less than. It just was. And so that's where she explained the narrative, the oscillating narrative, and I just gave everybody 3 lenses to look through, which is the truth, the hard facts that are unchanging, like where it occurred, the circumstances, and then what was true, so your experience, your emotion, and then what was distortion, and that's the false narrative we put behind it, the false truths. So that's what that's what Roots Tech was, and it was amazing. I had a lot of people I talked to afterwards who explained that they've started uncovering those within their own line, their own family trees, and saying, I just thought my grandma was just this bitter old woman. But then when they looked through the stories, they started seeing her experiences were so hard. And within her experiences, this is the story she told herself. And this is why she acted this way and had these opinions. And it really gives compassion. I mean, you have compassion for yourself and your own false beliefs, and then you have compassion for others when you really understand that narrative and what's true and what's distortion, and then what is just their experience.
It's such a powerful tool to have. I know when we started the experiment, one of the concerns was, well, what about for the people who aren't uncovering happy family stories?
Yes.
There's, we all have, I think it's safe to say that everyone has some sadness and tragedy and all of that in our stories.
Right. And if you don't think you have any,
looked hard enough.
yeah, maybe you haven't dived in, or maybe you're very scared of finding those, right?
Yeah.
One of the figures I gave at Roots Tech was, if we just go 12 generations, which I think puts us in the 1600s if you're around my age, collectively you have 32,764 grandparents, not including any second marriages. And that's just grandparents. So if you have 32,000 grandparents whose experiences have been passed and whose narratives, whether in better than or less than, have been passed, that's all affected you. And that's a lot to unpack. And so you will find amazing, wonderful stories, and you will find hardship, and you will find some of the deepest, darkest pains that you could imagine. And none of it affects your soul's worth. It's just their experience that can teach you how to become a stronger person. So that's one of those things where I'm like, if you haven't found any, you probably don't know that you have 32,000 grandparents just up until the 1600s. And that's how many people it's like it takes to create you. Like, that all had to happen for you to exist. Was that many?
Yeah, it's amazing. I think it is so powerful to be looking at our own stories as well. Like, this has helped me to, put my own story in a different light. Because I know one of our plans is the About Me plan, and we've had questions. Well, what parts of my story should I share? What should I even write down, the hard parts of my story? And so what advice would you give to those people on the About Me plan where they're not sure, what they should write down, what should even be part of their story?
Oh, I love that question. I think it's something that we've all thought about, right? And so when you have an experience, or when you can think back on an experience you've had in your childhood, the way to know if you're holding it in truth or if you're putting it in a distorted truth is if you've attached meaning to it. So this happened, and that means I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy. Ultimately it'll all go down to fear, a fear of some sort. So when you're sitting down and you're questioning, do I write down this story? What you ask yourself is, what meaning am I putting on this story? So if I'm going to tell my kids about, I'll just keep using lacrosse as an example, because my kids actually don't really even know that I played lacrosse. I don't think they know what it is. But it's an area that I put a lot of meaning on as a teenager, in a negative way. I was really embarrassed about it, and I never felt like I was enough, that I worked hard enough. And so I haven't talked about it too much. So if I were to sit down and I wanted to tell the kids, like, I was captain of the lacrosse team and I did this, my first inclination would be to not, because there's something around it that I'm embarrassed by, or that I have fear around, and I'm worried about what they're going to think. So I want to edit it. I want to omit things. And if I'm doing that, it's the evidence that the meaning I'm putting on it is in fear. So before I write it down, if I just think, what meaning am I putting on this? It may be that I'm better than everyone else, and that's why I want people to know. Or it might be that I don't want to write it because they're going to think I wasn't enough in some way. Those are both your evidences that I need to look at this and understand what the truth was and the true around the experience, and then I can write anything down because it has no meaning. So, for example, a lot of women and men experience eating disorders. And I have a friend who spent so much of her life with a really, really bad eating disorder. And she went from a place of fear, I don't want anybody to know this about me, to my eating disorder doesn't mean anything about my worth as an individual, and I can share that experience so others can learn from it. So that's how she's moved it into truth. And now she can write down, here was my experience, and here's how hard it was, and here's how I moved into healing. And then it becomes this story that really can pass through time and bless the lives of others. So that's what I would say when somebody's having a hard time knowing what story to sit and write down. Get really curious around it. Is this a story that I have fear around, that somebody's going to think less of me? Is this an experience that I want to write down so people think that I'm enough? Whatever those are, just recognize I'm putting meaning on this story, and I need to look at it deeper until it's just a story that doesn't tie to my worth, and now I can write it down. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. It does. Okay. I love that. And I think it's going to be so helpful. It's helpful to me. So I'm sure it will be helpful to a lot of these amazing people who are doing this experiment and being brave and writing their story.
It's such a vulnerable thing. And every time I've sat down, I love the prompts that you get to write something. And it really, fear will come in first. Because it takes vulnerability to share any part of yourself. And some people are really comfortable with that, and they're really good at telling a story and sharing themselves. And a lot of times it hits your root fears right away, and then you find all the reasons why you shouldn't do it. And so that's where it's, getting curious and recognizing, I guess, validating yourself in that vulnerability. Like, this is hard, and I'm going to trust that this might help somebody else in my family or somewhere else someday. It's a brave thing, and it's a very vulnerable thing. So I understand the fear behind it, and it just takes getting curious to move through it.
Yeah. Oh, it's good advice. I love this. I could talk about the mental health stuff all day. We have so many cool things to talk about. Another thing I wanted to talk about it. I love how open you are with sharing about the mental health aspect of it, sharing what your own family's doing. I loved following along back, I want to say it was October, November for Roots Tech London, where you went with Ruby Frank to the UK to help her uncover her roots, her startup story. We would love to hear a little bit more about that and what that was like.
Oh, absolutely. So that trip, my husband and I took Ruby and Kevin Frankie to London first for Roots Tech, and then we went up through a few cities in England, and then up to Scotland, over to Ireland, and home. And along the way, we taught Kevin and Ruby different stories about their lines. And this couple did not have any passion, any desire to do family history whatsoever. And it was just so funny because they didn't know that much about where they came from, aside from the little things that their family had told them. And right. Oh, and P.S. This was all documented. We brought a friend along who recorded the entire thing. So if you look at our startup family on YouTube, you can see this series. So when we got to London, my husband started teaching Kevin about all the royalty that he was from. And it was amazing because we went to the National Portrait Gallery, and we walked onto the second floor, and Johnny's like, that is your 12th great grandfather, and that is your cousin, and this is your uncle. And he was like, what? Really? It was just so shocking to him. And just that piece alone, start telling him who he was related to, woke Kevin up to really that he knew nothing about himself. And it was a really, really good realization. And then where we went with Ruby, we talked a lot about how her ancestors, you know, were moved by religion in the UK that they picked up everything and left and came to the US. And both stories were just so amazing. And the whole trip, Johnny and I were in the front seat driving, and Kevin and Ruby were right behind us. And Kevin was on his phone the whole time, and I thought he was just like checking Facebook. But he was studying on Wikipedia about this line. It's like the whole time. And then we would stop at a restaurant and he would tell us all about these people. And he traced it all the way down to where there was pain. And that's my passion behind all this. And you mentioned it. It's seeking the pain, because it's the pain that's going to teach us. It's the pain in our own lives that teaches us anything, but seeking the pain. And so with Ruby, we went, and ultimately the ancestor that I wanted to focus on left his wife and his daughter to leave for religious reasons. And the amount of pain that exists in that was so moving and so touching. And it just bonded Ruby to him, to this family member, and to his line, and to herself so much. And in both of them, it woke up this sense of self-worth that they didn't have before. And there's this other piece too, because as you do your family history, as you understand where you come from, you feel this support behind you to really look at your fear and to really start healing. And it's, you know, as your heart turns to them and theirs turns to you, it's this compassion for, we're not alone in our hardship. We're not alone in our struggles. We've all experienced pain, and we all try to hide pain in so many ways. We all try to avoid pain in so many ways. So after this trip and after these kinds of experiences with them, I've watched this transformation in their family and this transformation in their desire to seek understanding of themselves. And it's just been beautiful. It was so fun. It was just beautiful, like the countryside and everything. So for no other reason, watch it just to see how beautiful the UK was in October.
There's so much power in the place, I think, in walking and in being where they were, being where they're from. So I love that the trip encompassed that, the power of place, the power of the people, the power of stories, and like you said, the power of their pain. Like on the one hand, it's like, this is so cool, we're related to this king in the National Gallery. But I bet, I still remember that picture from your Instagram of like Ruby there with her, you know, her arms folded, like contemplating her ancestors' pain. Like, I'm sure that was just as impactful, if not more, than, you know, the awesome royalty that we all like to learn about too, who probably have their own pain as well.
Yes,
for sure.
There was a lot of pain. Kevin read through a lot of pain, and it really was. It was beautiful to watch, and the emotion. They felt close. They felt near. Do I have time to tell you one interesting thing about that one of those videos?
Oh, yes. We can go as long as you would like.
Oh, okay. I just don't want to keep you.
No, we're good.
So this whole trip built from place to place, telling story after story until we were going to end in Scotland, because there was this one ancestor is the one that Ruby really wanted to become acquainted with and know better. And so I had put in my GPS the address to this old cemetery, and there was going to be a brother and a sister of this relative there. So I thought that would be a great place to travel to and to stop. And then I would give her these pictures of his original journal entries and that Trace provided. And so we pulled off the side of the road to where there was supposed to be a church, and there wasn't, and we were losing daylight. The sun was going down, and so my husband said, well, I'm just going to drive up this dirt road to the top of this hill and see if it's back there. And we got to the top of this hill, and it was just a giant kale field. And I just said, you know, Ruby, let's just walk out there. I have something I'm going to give you to read. And she, oh my goodness, it was so amazing because I handed her these papers and I just said, just go start reading them. I think there was about 6 or 7 pages. And she walked out there, and I followed a little bit later, and I asked if she'd read some of it out loud. And she started reading how this grandpa, I think it was her 3rd great grandpa, when he was 12 would climb, well, his mother died when he was 12. And he had to leave school, and he was sent to another farm to work to help provide for the family. And he would climb to the top of a hill so he could look and see his home that he missed. And we stood there on the top of the hill, and down below was this little farm. And it was just, oh my goodness, like my heart changed thinking about this 12-year-old and my 12-year-old that was at home, and thinking about his love for his family and his longing for it. And then it changed the path of his life. So it was just, I mean, Ruby and I just sobbed because it was so powerful. And she watched how he, as a 12-year-old, experienced that loss and then found hope and love with a woman, and then left because of religious conviction. And then she saw how that affected generation after generation, and it was just like overwhelming. I mean, I've never been so grateful for a kale field. Well, I don't like kale. So.
It was meant to be.
It was meant to be. And not only that, but Trace or Juliet with Forebears Books, she gave us a book. She gave me a book to give to Ruby about this ancestor, and she opened it up, and the picture inside the book was these rolling hills with a little farmhouse, and we held the book and we looked up, and there was rolling hills and a little farmhouse. It was identical. I mean, it was so special. And I've never done a family history trip where there hasn't been an experience like that, where it's just, oh, and then there was a rainbow right above it.
Of course there was.
Of course there was a rainbow. But it's just, you connect to something supernatural when you look at this. You connect to an unknown that you couldn't foresee, and then it wakes up this piece of you that you didn't know was asleep. And it was beautiful. And that's all depicted in those videos. I mean, I get emotional every single time I think about it because it was so special.
Oh, that's so powerful. There's power in those stories. I mean, I teared up too. And there's stories like that in all of our lines, that
yes.
we can discover and connect with. So many good things. Let's see. What stories, and you've shared a lot of amazing stories. Have there been any specific stories, during this time where we've been in self-isolation? Are there any ancestor stories that have given you or your family like strength and courage as you've been going through this?
Do you know the story? I mean, there's been a few, but the one that comes to mind the most is that I had a second great grandfather who was quarantined for smallpox, and he was put in a car, and he was dropped in the mountains in Colorado to this little abandoned shack, and he was told he had to stay there until he didn't have smallpox anymore. And I read his journal, and he talked about how they gave him a sack of potatoes. He had to find a water source. He patched the roof. I'm like, okay, I'm quarantined with TV and with groceries, and I can still do DoorDash. You know, like nobody just gave me a sack of potatoes and told me
No.
to go
Find a
figure
water
things out.
source.
Yeah, yeah. And there was a man who would come and visit him. But the thing I loved about his journal is he kept a sense of humor. And he would, I mean, he was just snarky. He reminded me of me, and my snarkiness is really kind of like a petty, just annoyance, you know, that I don't want to be home. I want to go out and do something. But it gave me an appreciation. It gave me appreciation for the setting I'm in, even if I have to be here. And I think it's a little unfair where he was like legitimately quarantined, and I'm calling this quarantine when I can still do quite a bit.
Oh my
I
goodness.
love that. Yeah, I loved that.
Yeah, mountains of Colorado with a sack of potatoes. Oh man. Yeah, I'll take this. I'll do this.
Yeah, sure. I have like sour cream for my baked potatoes. I'm fine. Yeah.
We have some chives. We're all set.
Yes.
We got all the good stuff. Now, at the beginning of the interview, you mentioned you have 7 kids and 1 on the way, and we've covered a lot of the deep stuff, right? We've dived in. It's given me a lot to think about it. I've loved it. But we've covered some of the deep. We could probably keep going for a long time on the deep. I love it so much. But I thought maybe we would end with, like, what are some of the, just fun and simple ways that you do family history with your family? Because I know you post a lot of fun tips on your Instagram. What are things that you do as I'm sure you're busy with those 6 boys and that cute little girl. So how do you fit it in? I know you got the bedtime stories going on. You got those.
I think it depends on how you define family history, right? Let's see, I wanted to see what this person said. You would also be dealing with feet of snow. That is true. That is true. Fortunately, I think it was like when it was thawing out that he was in Colorado. So I've asked myself a long time ago, what does it mean to do family history? And because there was this question, especially with the role I play in my church of being in charge of seeing if people are doing family history, I started saying, like, how do you do it? What is it? And breaking down like each word, really defining each word within family history. So a lot of times, especially with this connections experiment, it's the documenting piece. It's chat books, it's making sure that things are recorded someplace. I love the journal app. Oh, I can't remember what it is, but it's like 1 or +1 or
day
something.
1.
Day 1.
Day 1?
Thank you.
Yes,
Day
I
1.
got it.
Yeah. I'm glad I open it, but I never pay attention to the app. Day 1. It's just, I've already taken 4 pictures today. I can just put those in and hurry and explain what it was we did. My 6-year-old just sliced his foot open a couple weeks ago, and
I saw that.
Yeah.
Oh, no fun.
No fun. Oh, it was awful. I actually, I had a massive breakdown watching him helping pin him down to get shots in his foot. And I really thought about my ancestors, who witnessed their children go through pain. And I mean, I sobbed thinking of their pain, and then thinking of, how grateful I was that it wasn't like cutting off a leg, or it wasn't, like, I'm grateful for my time period and my experience. And so I made sure to write that piece down. Doing the family history with the kids is documenting what they're doing, what they're saying, and then making sure they know the stories of, like I said, Grandma is the one that helped me figure out, or taught me how to plant a pot of flowers. You might think you just stick flowers in, but she told me to fill the whole bottom with styrofoam, and then it takes up half the pot, or like those kinds of things, where I just want them to know where the lesson came from. And so really the history behind why I do what I do, and um, and same with their dad. So it's a lot of, it's just a lot, it's mostly right now, it's a lot of talking and a lot of pictures and documenting.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. And I love how you said sometimes we focus so much on like the doing, but a lot of it's, just the living. Like I'm sure, when you were helping your son when he was in pain, you weren't thinking, okay, now time to do some family. I'm going to think about my ancestors.
Check. I did my ancestor thought for the day. Yeah, it was.
No, it just naturally came to you. Yeah. And I love that. I think that's beautiful.
I think that's probably the goal, right? That we should all get to, where it's just, it's not a box to be checked. It's just a thought. It's just my heart turned to them in appreciation, or in sadness, or in sorrow. And then the promise is that their heart will turn to you. And then somewhere they're acknowledging like, oh, you understand me better, or you're suffering and I have experienced this too. I can bring a comfort from my spiritual state. I mean, it's just doing family history is just making sure it's in your thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's wonderful and perfect for us busy moms too.
I know. Thank heavens. Thank heavens, because if there was a big checklist, I can tell you right now, I wouldn't do it.
There's just no time.
Yeah, there wouldn't be time right now.
Well, I have just loved everything we've talked about. I've learned a lot. I felt a lot, and I think that's important for family history. And just as we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share? Anything we haven't addressed that you'd like to address, or anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
I do think that one of the biggest things that gets in the way of us doing family history is the fear of what we're going to find, and the fear that what it will do is evidence that we're not enough, or that we're not lovable, or that our needs don't matter, or that we're not worthy in some way. And so when we find ourselves, like being, inhibited, or when we want to put it off, we need to ask ourselves why. You need to ask yourself why. And what it will do is actually heal those fears. So that's, one of the greatest reasons why we don't look at it, is because we think that it's only going to magnify our fears and prove them true. And so that's when I talk to people, I ask people, do you do your family history just to see them squirm? It's just like a simple pleasure. But the truth is, it's basically, are you scared to look at where you come from and why? And then the promise on the other side of that is, what you'll find is how human everybody is, and how much pain has existed in the world since the beginning, and how you're not alone in it. And that is what will heal your mental health, is the process of uncovering that and really bringing the fears to the light. And so I think that would be the last thing I would want to leave anybody with, is in this process of the connections experiment, what it's really going to do is get you to look at you and connect to yourself first, and give you the opportunity to kind of look in the mirror and go, who am I, and why am I the way I am? And then you'll see just how perfectly imperfect you are as you look at the other family members who are also perfectly imperfect.
Mm-hmm. That's so significant, and I think it's such an important part of learning our family history. And it's all about the connecting, and I love that you said we're imperfectly imperfect, and so are they, and we can learn so much from them. Thank you so much for coming on with us tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so happy you could get on. We'll have this video. It'll be saved in our stories the next 24 hours, and then we download them. So if people want to watch them, they will be on the Connections Experiment YouTube channel too. So everyone else can learn. It's so amazing. So with that, we'll sign off. Thank you again so
My
much,
pleasure.
Paige, and I hope everyone has a good night.
Thank you. We'll see you.